Those stories coming up, but first tonight, Treasurer Scott Morrison's second budget is just 12 days away, and we were led to believe that housing affordability was to be its central theme. But while housing affordability measures will still be there, they'll be modest compared to what many economists and the opposition have been calling for. With every major lever considered either politically or economically fraught, the government's looking elsewhere for its main act, and 7:30 understands infrastructure will be a big-ticket item. Tonight, we can reveal that the Prime Minister will be pursuing a new approach to building roads, rail, dams and pipelines. Here's political correspondent Andrew Probyn with his analysis.
There's a road being built in Queensland that really annoys Malcolm Turnbull. It's not that he doesn't support its construction.
The second range crossing is going to bring Toowoomba, its people, its businesses, closer to their markets.
But what irritates the Prime Minister, according to my cabinet sources, is the way the 41-kilometre Toowoomba bypass is being funded.
How deep is the cutting going to be?
The federal government has put a truckload of money towards it, more than $1 billion, which is 80% of the total cost.
What a strong city, what a strong economy. We are supporting it, we're backing it every inch of the way.
Yet when the road is finished in late 2018, the PM knows the Queensland government will claim much of the kudos. Worse for the Commonwealth, the state government will also be the beneficiary of a toll, with drivers paying up to $30 a vehicle.
The Commonwealth can no longer be a passive ATM.
If Malcolm Turnbull and his Treasurer have their way, things are about to change.
In this budget, we'll be making changes to the way we report government debt and link it to government spending by increasing the visibility in the budget between good and bad debt.
Good debt and bad debt? There was a time when all debt, especially Labor's, was like the plague.
Here it goes. Here we are.
Then opposition leader Malcolm Turnbull even launched a so-called debt truck back in 2009.
And now we're heading for the biggest debt in our history. And that debt will have to be repaid, the interest on it will have to be paid.
Malcolm Turnbull will now need a road train to cover the Turnbull-Morrison debt, which is being inflicted on every Australian.
So what does the government mean by good debt as opposed to bad debt?
It can be very wise for governments to borrow, especially while rates are low, to lock in longer-term low-cost financing and invest in major growth-producing infrastructure assets, particularly in transport and energy infrastructure. But to rack up government debt to pay for welfare payments and other everyday expenses is not a good idea.
So roads, rail, gas pipelines, ports, dams, that's good debt, right? But does that mean running costs in health, welfare and education are bad?
What about education?
Go on.
Well, is that a good debt if debt is run up for something which will increase the capacity of the country?
Well, everyday expenditure is everyday expenditure. You know, food is everyday expenditure. Now, if you're borrowing money to buy food every week, then that is not sustainable either.
Today, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer are changing the goalposts. It's tantamount to an admission of failure. They say that they can't get on top of the debt, so now they're going to redefine the debt. Well, this is absolute surrender by the government.
There's evil genius afoot with the distinction between good and bad debt. It's part budget fiddle and part groundwork for what's coming. It's dawned on the government that making housing affordability its headline act wasn't so wise after all, especially when it can't solve the crisis alone. So infrastructure is now going to be its big focus. I understand that much of the $50 billion infrastructure plan from last year's budget is going to be brought forward, and that's not all. 7:30 can reveal that the government is now intent on taking equity stakes in big infrastructure projects. That's the lesson out of the Toowoomba bypass. The Turnbull government no longer wants to simply hand over cash with no strings attached. While this will mean more loans instead of grants, it could see the government assuming part ownership of the second Sydney airport at Badgerys Creek. Or it might mean the government collects a slice of tolls from roads it helps fund, as the PM wants to do with Melbourne's Western distributor.
Good debt is not free. It has to be paid for. The difference is you've got an asset and you've got an activity that is going to generate an income stream that can pay for it. and that's why it's a good debt.
This is the change. If infrastructure is just a welfare item and it doesn't pay for itself, then you can have problems, and I'd like to think that every bit of infrastructure needed to pay for itself. So why not make infrastructure funding from the federal government based on a loan, and therefore you get private development around it that helps to pay it back?
Peter Newman, one of the PM's advisors on cities policy, says infrastructure projects don't always offer good debt, nor are they always popular. WestConnex in Sydney, Melbourne's East-West Link and the Perth Freight Link have each had their critics, either on economic, community or environmental grounds.
There's some very bad examples where Tony Abbott dropped big road projects on us that we didn't need. They were just designed to sort of create jobs out of digging up places.
When the mining boom came off, essentially they were looking for the next wave of growth engines, right? And effectively the one selected was households and household debts.
Financial analyst Martin North says the government is looking to catch a more promising wave for growth.
What we found in practice is that whilst we have high house prices, high debt, high mortgage stress, poor affordability, we still haven't solved our growth equation. So essentially now there's a need to find a new narrative around growth and how growth can be developed. And so perhaps this is a way of trying to twist the story a little bit and give a different perspective on things. But, you know, debt is still debt. It still needs to be repaid.
There is a difference between government debt that you incur because you're living beyond your means, because you're spending more than you're receiving in tax, and debt that you incur in order to build an asset, particularly an economic assets like rail or like the NBN, for example.
Not every project is going to be as cleverly funded as the NBN. The broadband network has been kept entirely off the budget bottom line because of its return to taxpayers. But it's clear that from now on, the government wants to use whatever infrastructure it funds to leverage maximum economic and political benefit.
You can keep the economy ticking over by building more suburbs on the fringe and a bit of infrastructure to service that. But the real economic gain, the productivity gain, comes when you build high-density centres where knowledge economy jobs are attracted, and they become globally competitive and innovative, real productivity gains. That's the benefit that you get from good infrastructure, not continuing to just sprawl our cities.
I think we've still got the basic problem that debt is debt, right? Now you want to be investing in the future, you want to be investing in growth, because if you can get enough growth, then you've got the ability to repay the debt. If you haven't got growth, what happens is that the debt just goes down the generations and never gets paid off.